Welcome back. I'm Vanessa Roberts with Federal News Network, and we're talking with Rob Burton, a partner in the Government Contracts Group at the law firm Kroll and Mooring. Hello again, Rob.
Oh, good to see you. Thanks so much again for having me today.
Well, this has been really interesting so far, but let's start getting into a little bit about how you advise contractors when they want to get into the federal marketplace and some of the things that they can do to really make those first steps. I think sometimes, especially now, people are used to using spreadsheets, email, maybe they haven't worked with the federal government. Talk a little bit about what are practical steps that you actually advise people on?
Well, it's a much more competitive world today, I hate to tell you. As a matter of fact, for small businesses, it's becoming very difficult. Over the last decade, you have seen the number of contracting opportunities actually reduce. The government spends a lot of money, don't get me wrong, they're spending more money than ever. But the actual contracting opportunities have decreased. The industrial base of small businesses has increased rather dramatically. And you need to distinguish yourself. And so one thing I do when I work with these contractors who are trying to approach the federal government in an effective way, you cannot do the same old, same old. You know, it's just, you have to distinguish yourself. You're gonna have to show that you are at the cutting edge of innovation and automation. It just goes with the turf now. This is really basic. The government wants to see that. And so you need to show the government how incredibly efficient your operation is, that it in effect is a model for the government. The government, in other words, has low risk. If I deal with you, it's low risk. And more than likely, the company's profitability is going to go up and they're going to be more competitive too. To the extent they can convince the government, I'm low risk, I bring something to the marketplace that very few other people do. You know, I am at the cutting edge of innovation and technology advancement and the use of AI. This is absolutely critical to be competitive in this marketplace. And so one of the first things, I tell them with respect to the capabilities briefings that I try to arrange for them with federal procurement executives is to highlight how efficient you are internally, in your internal operation, that you basically have everything from A to Z buttoned up and you can provide the data just like that. You are very sophisticated with your data analytics. You know program management inside and out. So no matter what the skill set you really bring to the table, whatever your real proficiency is, you had better color it with, I also do real basic things like data analytics really well. I do program management really well. No matter what your basic, whether you're an IT contractor or you're just delivering product, you want to at least say, I do everything else incredibly well with respect to things you, an agency would be interested in, especially from program management and data analytics. Believe it or not, Vanessa, these are areas that the government really struggles with itself. And so to the extent contractors can say, I know it's hard, but we have figured it out, and we actually do have good data analytics, and we're really good at program management.
Talk a little bit about the fact that there are a lot of, the risk thing you brought up, there's a lot of compliance that goes into most federal contracts. Depending on what agency it is, it varies a lot from agency to agency. That's another thing. It can be very different from one to the other. But talk about that, like that risk assessment piece, because that also plays into what contracts, like a vendor or a contractor is going to go for, right? They're going to look at that data and try to figure out and assess their own risk. But that's based a lot on what are the compliance requirements on me and how long is it going to take me to do these things. I mean, you're getting at that and that you're bringing that, those efficiencies to the agency, but how does that play out on the other side for the contractors? Do they talk to you a lot about that as well?
Oh, they do, absolutely. I mean, again, it goes to the challenge of dealing with the federal government. The government is so difficult to deal with because compliance is the big thing. The government is absolutely focused on compliance. So it is incredibly important, and small businesses struggle with this. They have got to have a compliance program at their facility that really has all the bells and whistles. I have been surprised in today's world that some contractors simply don't have compliance programs. They don't have automated monitoring systems with respect to what do the clauses require, to what extent am I in compliance with those clauses. All of this now, with some of the contractors I work with, is totally automated. And they have little red flags, that come up in an automated way. It's rather impressive, quite frankly. But some businesses cut corners. They don't want to do the investment, and compliance comes second. With the government, this is one thing that's different between the commercial world and the federal government. It's all about compliance. And the problem is, if you don't comply, if you as a contractor try to wing it, I hate to tell you, but the government is not sympathetic. And the government, what's that old saying, ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Right.
And the government's not, I have been amazed at how the government's even gone after small businesses in a most aggressive way for compliance violations, which result in some type of action by the government, and it can be as bad as suspension or debarment. It can be that bad. And it is a double standard. I hate to tell you, but the large companies are not getting debarred. It will be the more mid and small companies that the government will be less forgiving. The government can't do without some of these large contractors that it works with. Not so much with the small and the mid-sized companies. So compliance is so important, and in order to meet that compliance, you're not going to be able to do everything with spreadsheets and all the paper processes of 20 years ago. It's going to have to be automated with some type of beginning to end automated system.
Ignorance is not bliss.
There you go.
Right? No, it can be really painful. And to your point, like it can completely ban you from being able to actually sell into the federal government for periods of time based on if you fail at some compliance.
Well, and even if it doesn't result in some type of formal action of that nature, the government, even though it's big, is smaller than you think. And so these agencies actually speak to one another. I've actually had procurement executives call me for recommendations, like what small business do you think does this well? Who would you recommend? They're calling me from outside the government. And so if they're doing that, I can assure you, they're calling some of their colleagues within the government. Have you dealt with this contractor before? What's their performance been like? They will actually, here we actually do have communication, where we're actually picking up the phone and having a conversation.
Right.
That is actually happening because the government doesn't like risk. It doesn't like risk. It doesn't want, if it's a contractor they have not used to dealing with, they don't have a history of dealing with that contractor, they're going to check you out, more than likely.
That's interesting. The whole thing follows up on my next thing about metrics. I mean, GSA has the Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System, CPARS, which is where supposedly, they're tracking and rating all these contractors. But there's a lot of other factors that people look at or agencies look at when they are thinking about people they're going to hire, right? I mean, what are some of the metrics and performance things that really do matter? You've talked about it a little bit, but maybe we can focus on that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure, Vanessa. It's interesting. This is one area where I've seen the government starting to change. 10, 20 years ago, it was all about CPAR. Let me check the CPAR. What's the rating? The government more and more is also not being robust in their CPAR evaluations. I don't know for what reason, but everybody's satisfactory. I have seen more and more ratings. You're satisfactory, okay? And it doesn't mean a whole lot. If I see that you're satisfactory, or maybe very good, but they tend to be fairly conservative in their CPAR evaluations. They tend to look all much the same. There's not a whole lot of descriptive evaluation in the CPAR. Agencies, not all, but more and more agencies are starting to go elsewhere to determine, are you the type of contractor I want to deal with? One thing agencies are doing more and more, they're going to outside contractors who specialize in what I'll call business information services. These contractors have data. They tend to be credit bureaus. They tend to be organizations or companies that give credit ratings, and they evaluate risk of dealing with a company from a credit standpoint. But they have all of these reports on risk factors. Your prior history with the government. What contracts have you had? How have you performed? Much more robust in the CPAR evaluations, and also giving you a view into the commercial work that they've done. And then most importantly, what's your financial stability? You're a small business. Do you really operate as a real robust business? What's your loan situation? Are you making your loan payments? Are you in financial jeopardy? None of that's in a CPAR evaluation. Okay, so none of that's in a CPAR evaluation. But if you don't like risk, and the government doesn't like risk, you're going to want that kind of robust report. And some of these business information reports that companies provide to the government are low cost. I mean, it just is not a huge investment. And so more and more government agencies, to avoid risk, mitigate the risk, are investing in those types of metrics, and they're called risk reports. A lot of them show risk ratings. One is good or bad, and 100 is really bad. And so those more and more agencies are using outside sources to evaluate risk and the quality performance of a contractor.
And that really talks to like the ability to actually deliver on time, to meet, comply, all of those things, because it's going to come through in that report if they haven't been doing those things.
To some extent, they tend to be focused on financial stability. They tend to be, these reports tend to be on what kind of risk are you from a financial standpoint. I mean, if you're not real stable financially, you are risk. You are a risk for the government. And that does not show up anywhere but through third-party reports of the nature I'm speaking of.
So you talked about that, today, like some things are just, you have to be in the technology game. It's not a question or a choice. You eventually have to move into that world if you really want to continue to grow as a federal contractor. Talk about what are the things that, you suggest people look at if they're going to look at a technology that they want to use, if they want to look at contracts, lifecycle management types of technologies, and partners. What are the things they should look at when they're looking at people that they want to hire to work with?
Well, that's a very good question, and I do get that question, Vanessa. I get that question, and I think the easiest approach is to look at your competitors. Where are your competitors? Doing work? Are they doing work in DoD? Are they doing work in what agencies are they involved with? And I think you want to look at those competitors and see who they are using and what technology they are using. I'm assuming if you're a competitor, you probably want to be just at least as good as far as your internal processes and your use of artificial intelligence, for example. Well, look to see who are the competitors using. So if you have a competitor that's really big in DoD, okay, who are they using to support them? They've done a lot of this research. I mean, why reinvent the wheel? Or IT companies. Who are they using to improve their internal processes? They probably are hiring an outside contractor to assist them. Right. Who are they using? I don't think you can do any better when you decide who should I use for this type of support and contract life management support, what we've been talking about here. In deciding who to use, I would look to see who's everybody else using, and what's their success rate. Right. To what extent has their technology saved the other company administrative costs? And some companies will actually discuss this. I mean, how the government picks up the phone. I mean, there's nothing that prohibits companies from calling each other and saying, "Hey, who do you use for this type of support? And what's their success rate been? And how much in administrative costs have you saved?" Some companies will probably be helpful in that regard. And I've been amazed, too, on this issue of savings, because sometimes I've talked to companies that have saved up to 30% in administrative costs by just automating the contract lifecycle process from the very beginning to the end, from the market research all the way through contract award to the audit at the end of the process and contract closeout.
Making it super worthwhile. I mean, if you think about that, that's a huge savings.
Well, and I think it's becoming absolutely critical to be competitive in this market. You really almost have no choice but to automate the entire contract lifecycle process. I think more and more contractors are doing it, and you want to be competitive. And agencies are watching and respecting companies that do this. So I think everybody really needs to get with the 21st century here.
So Rob, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
It's been really fun too. We've been talking with Rob Burton of Kroll and Mooring on Federal News Network about contract lifecycle management. I'm Vanessa Roberts. To learn more about federal contract management best practices, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Technomile.